the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, an agent of the Imperium, notes on the hard-hitting Carrera-verse, and tales of the war that might have been had the Cold War turned hot and very, very weird. Plus, we continue our complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. All that right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's an honor to have you along. First, a late breaking news bulletin. This just in, I am not Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. Longtime listeners to the podcast might recognize my voice, though not the face that goes with it. I'm Baen Consulting Editor David Ibfrh. I've guest hosted the podcast a few times back when it was audio only, and I'm excited to be here now in living Technicolor with you. I'm also pleased to say that you'll be hearing and or seeing me more often in the future, as I'll be sitting in for Tony Daniel about once a month. For my first podcast back in the saddle and on video, I talked with the editor and some of the contributors to the new anthology, Weird World War III, which is out now in trade paperback and ebook. This new collection of stories imagines what might have happened if the Cold War had turned hot and gotten very, very weird. It was a pleasure talking with editor Sean Patrick Hazlett and contributors Erica L. Satifka, T.C. McCarthy, and John Langan, and I think you'll really be interested to hear what they had to say. But first, the news. The post-apocalypse October ebook sale continues. Until the stroke of midnight on Halloween, save big on John Ringo ebooks. Save $2 per ebook in John Ringo's Black Tide Rising original series. That is the books Under a Graveyard Sky, To Sail a Darkling Sea, Islands of Rage and Hope, and Strands of Sorrow. Plus, save $1 off on other John Ringo ebooks. And this sale applies across the World Wide Web wherever you buy your ebooks. Fiction and nonfiction on Baen.com. This month we have a new short story set in the Traveler universe by legendary game designer Mark Miller. Miller's new novel, Agent of the Imperium, is out in trade paperback next month, and he wrote this short story as a tie-in. As an agent of the Imperium, Agent Shigili's life is governed by the rules all agents are honor-bound to follow. But when he finds himself once again reactivated for duty, it is in a situation for which no rules exist. But Agent Shigili of the Quarantine has long ago learned an important lesson. Any action is better than inaction, and he will do whatever it takes to restore peace and honor to the Imperium. The story is called The Red Ship, and it is on Baen.com right now. Go check it out. For nonfiction this month, we conclude our three-part essay, Notes on the Carrera-verse, a concordance, more or less, by Carrera series creator Tom Kratman. In this series of essays, Kratman outlines the history and the world building of the hard-hitting Patricio Carrera series. You can read part 3 as well as the earlier 2 installments right now on Baen.com. Now here's our roundtable interview discussing Weird World War III, an all-new anthology of science fiction, fantasy, and horror stories edited by Sean Patrick Hazlett. It's out now in trade paperback and ebook editions. Hey everybody, I'm here with the editor and some of the contributors to Weird World War III, an all-new anthology of tales of the war that might have been, had the Cold War between the Soviets and the West heated up. And looking at that prospect through a science fiction, fantasy, and sometimes even a horror lens. Let's go ahead and meet the editors and, the editor and the participants now. First up, let me see, the editor, Mr. Sean Patrick Hazlett. He's an Army veteran, speculative fiction writer and editor, and finance executive in the San Francisco Bay Area. He holds an AB in history and a BS in electrical engineering from Stanford University and a master's in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he won the 2006 Policy Analysis Exercise Award for his work on policy solutions to Iran's nuclear weapons program under the guidance of future Secretary of Defense Ashton B. Carter. He also holds an MBA from the Harvard Business School, where he graduated with second-year honors. As a cavalry officer serving in the elite 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, he trained various Army and Marine Corps units for war in Iraq and Afghanistan. While at the Army's National Training Center, he became an expert in Soviet doctrine and tactics, something that maybe came in handy when putting this together. We'll see. He has also published a Harvard Business School case study on the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment and how it exemplified a learning organization. He is a 2017 winner of the Writers of the Future contest. Over 40 of his short stories have appeared in publications such as the year's best military and adventure science fiction. I'll give myself credit for that one. I was the editor there.
Thank you.
Good working with you. Year's best hardcore horror, Terraform, Galaxy's Edge, Writers of the Future, Grimdark Magazine, Vesterian, and Abyss and Apex, among others. He is an active member of the Horror Writers Association and Codex Writers Group, and this is his first anthology that he's put together. Sean, thanks so much for putting the book together, first off, and of course, coming on the podcast to talk with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, David. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Now on to the contributors to the book. First up, John Langan is the author of 2 novels and 3 collections of stories. For his novel, The Fisherman, he was awarded the Bram Stoker and This Is Horror Awards. With Paul Tremblay, he co-edited Creatures, 30 Years of Monsters. He is one of the founders of the Shirley Jackson Awards, for whose first 3 years he served as a juror. Currently, he reviews horror and dark fantasy for Locust Magazine. He lives in New York's Hudson Valley with his wife, younger son, and he isn't sure how many animals anymore. His next collection of stories, Children of the Fang and Other Genealogies, is forthcoming from Word Horde in 2020. Or maybe is it out already, John?
It just came out last month. Yeah.
Okay, well, congratulations on the book birthday.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. T.C. McCarthy is an award-winning and critically acclaimed Southern author whose short fiction has appeared in Per Contra, the International Journal of the Arts, Literature and Ideas, Story Quarterly, and Nature. Bain Books released his latest novel, Tiger Burning, in July 2019. And we've also got one forthcoming, Tiger Bright. His earlier debut military science fiction trilogy, those are Germline, Exogene, and Chimera, was released in 2012, and that's available worldwide. In addition to being an author, TC is a PhD scientist, a Fulbright Fellow, and a Howard Hughes Biomedical Research Scholar. TC, thanks for coming on and talking about Weird World War III.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you.
And last but not least, as I always like to say, Erica L. Satifka's short fiction has appeared in Inner Zone, Clark's World, and Daily Science Fiction. She is the author of the British Fantasy Award-winning Stay Crazy from Apex Publications and the Rural Juror, you guys ever watched 30 Rock? The rural cyberpunk novella Busted Synapses from Broken Eye Books. If you want to read more of her stories, catch them all at her website, ericasatifka.com. Erica, it is great to have you on the Bain Free Radio Hour.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
All right, so I wanted to talk, Sean, probably to you first, since you put this all together and this is your brainchild, if you will. But first, before we talk about the specifics of the book, this book is dedicated to 2 men that were very important to you. And feel free to talk about both if you like. I think one, probably more personal just to you, whereas the second, I'm talking about Mike Resnick, is somebody kind of, I think that touched a lot of people's lives and writers, both fans and readers as well, but with his work as an editor and with Writers of the Future and such. And so I just wanted to, how had Resnick sort of influenced you and maybe mentored you and that kind of aspect in putting together this first anthology of yours?
Yeah, so I'll address both. So the first person, and I'll talk about Mike at the tail end. So the first person that the anthology was dedicated to was Captain Ralph J. Harding. He served with me very briefly in the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment. The 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment is an elite cavalry regiment that's been around since the turn of the last century. David Drake also served in the 11th Cavalry in Vietnam, and my friend Jay Harding did. He served overseas. He took charge of the sister company that I served with when I was at the National Training Center, and he also graduated in my high school class. His daughter was born in the same hospital ward about a day apart from mine. So this is dedicated to his memory. He was the best of us, and typically those are the people who die in combat. He was leading by example, inspecting a truck for improvised explosive devices, and he's doing it personally, as all good leaders do, leadership by example, and this is dedicated to him. It's also dedicated to Mike Resnick, and Mike Resnick is well known for taking young authors and editors under his wing. This anthology would not have been possible without his advice and mentorship. When I asked him first to participate in it, he said, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. Do you have another one, just in case it gets rejected?" And I originally had asked him to solicit him for another anthology with Bain that Bain's subsequently did not pick up, and this was the second idea that that I was inspired by. So as you all know, he passed earlier this year, and and one of his last stories is in this anthology. So I want to make it clear that I acknowledge we I think Isaac Newton once said that if I've seen far, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants, and Mike Resnick was that kind of person. So it wouldn't have been possible without him.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that there was one anthology you had an idea for that didn't get picked up, but this one did,
Yep.
And we're glad to have it. And this is, as I said in the little intro, sort of stories of the war that might have been had the Cold War heated up or gone different directions. And I just wondered if you could talk about both where the idea for that came from and how you approached it with the authors, and sort of your central conceit of what that might look like, and I mean, maybe how much free reign you gave people, and just all that as you were putting this together, in both in your head before you pitched it, and then of course as you're assembling it.
Yeah, the central conceit of this anthology is think Tom Clancy meets H.P. Lovecraft, and that's at a very high level what I was trying to get at. But it's also very specific. So I grew up in the 80s during the Cold War, and I served in the military right about when it ended and after, when the Soviet Union was still, their doctrine and tactics were still the most competent peer competitor that we faced at the time. So when I was at the National Training Center, I learned their doctrine and tactics intimately and used that to fight against other U.S. military units before they went overseas to war. So I wanted to have an anthology that looked at kind of the alternative history of what that war would have looked like, either be it conventional or nuclear. Additionally, I wanted to have a speculative element induced in that. In some stories, it's subtle, and some stories it's at the center of the at the center of the story. And at the same time, I wanted to bring in authors that Bain was very familiar with, like T.C., David Drake, Brad Torgerson, that folks know and love, and have that strong military science fiction fantasy angle. But I also wanted to introduce Bain to some new authors on the weird side, who I think very highly of. Two of whom are on this call. So if you ever want to read a phenomenal novel, read The Fisherman, which is the Bram Stoker award-winning author by John Langan. And then newer voices, new voices relative here, like Erica Satifka, who's also on this call, who write tremendously, extremely good weird fiction. And I think, collaborating with both of them and just adding, some of that military, background for, some more, some verisimilitude in some of the stories, I think really helped. So that's kind of the background of what I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, when I was looking through the table of contents that everybody who you got on here, I was kind of a little jealous. I recognized so many names, and as you said, and this kind of goes along with just to honor him a little bit more, Mike Resnick's sort of viewpoint of you mix the old timers and then the up and comers, and maybe introduce some of the greats of the genre to people who aren't familiar with them, but they are familiar with what's going on now, and vice versa. And I think you did a great job of getting that mix, and just so many great authors, and again, some of whom are here today. Let me see. I wanted to talk about, because of course at the center of a lot of these stories is a lot of the weird things, either inspired by or literally in some cases, that the Soviets and the US and the West did, things like Project Blue Book and remote viewing and all this. And authors, if you guys want to chime in, how much research you're obviously very familiar with Soviet tactics, but how much of that sort of off the beaten path, strange, secret, almost secret history kind of thing did you look into for these? And authors, if you want to talk about maybe some of those elements you might have drawn on that sound like science fiction or fantasy, but they're actually real world things that we were looking into.
So I'll start really quick, well, hopefully really quick. There was a story that in the anthology that Sarah Hoyt wrote that made heavy use of remote viewing. Remote viewing is also tangentially mentioned in David Drake's story. So I'm just like, I've heard about this before. I'm interested to learn more about it. And it turns out if you go to the CIA's website, they have declassified documents there. So they talk about projects like Project Gondola Wish, which was a survey that the U.S. military did on all of the Russian, Soviet paranormal programs, stretching all the way back to, the 1920s, et cetera. And what that did in the late 70s is kind of freaked out the U.S. defense establishment. So they started doing a lot of work on sussing out some of these things and seeing if there was any there. So they started projects like Project Center Lane, Sunstreak. It kind of ended with Stargate. But they looked at something called remote viewing. To start that, they contracted with SRI, which is the Stanford Research Institute out here in Palo Alto, and they brought in folks who had some of these abilities and actually operationalized some of the techniques, tactics, and procedures. And depending on who you talk to, former members of the remote viewing program, which was based out of Fort Meade, Maryland, there was some successes, and then there were some things didn't quite pan out. But TC's compatriots, when the leaks started happening in 1995, they abruptly canceled the program, and then the CIA took over, and then the CIA kind of just said, "Oh, none of this worked categorically. Not effective. Didn't work." But it's just fascinating to read some of these operational reports, and they're just freely available to anybody. You just go to the website, and you can catalog the history there. And then, of course, Project Blue Book. There's been recent news in the New York Times about, I think they call them IAPs now. Advanced. I don't know what it stands for, but it's basically what UFOs were. You've seen the USS Nimitz incident in 2003. So there's a lot of stuff out there that whether or not you believe it, there have been programs that have been declassified that looked into these phenomena.
Yeah, and TC, maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about it. It seemed to me that your story, Zip Ghost, maybe hit on that kind of aspect a little bit more of the contributors here, of that sort of, it's not really a cult. You have a science fiction kind of backing to it, but that sort of more out there secret program behind things. Did you, when you were writing that story, were you thinking of these? Is this based on something that was, I don't want to say was real, but that was
in jail right now.
It's definitely not. I mean, I can't speak for TC, but it's definitely.
I should say,
TC, I'm not.
what was your jumping off point, I guess?
Well,
Was this a total flight of fantasy, or was there a jumping off point based on?
It's another author in the anthology, and tell me if my sound's too loud. I don't know. I can't get a good feel for it. Another author in the anthology, I think it was him, Nick Mamatas, a long time ago when I first started to try and kind of break into the business, mentioned that when you're thinking of a short story, don't go with the first idea that pops into your head, because chances are, 100 other people are going to come up with that idea. And I really took the word weird in the title to heart. So I probably went with my 50th idea. And that was this concept of, all right, well, in science fiction, the multiverse is kind of popular now, has been for a while. What if we base it in a kind of scene or a setting, my story, where there is a multiverse. We know how to move between, or in some cases stop from moving between, because in my story, it happens whether you want it to or not, unless you do certain things. What if we have a Cold War where instead of territories on Earth, the territory is the multiverse, and the Russians and Americans are going at it like we did back in the 60s and 70s with proxy wars and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I went with my story. It takes place in Vietnam and in a proxy war, but in this case, American special forces are going at it against some Russian special forces. And of course, it's very bizarre. I love saying this. I've probably said it on every interview that I've been in recently. But the only way again, I went weird. The only way to prevent the kind of spontaneous movement of your consciousness from one particular Earth to another Earth in another universe is to have syphilis, and B, take lots of peyote. So you definitely, with those kind of components, you get a real kind of setting for something very strange and odd, but I think at the same time that works. And there's a little bit of the absurd in it, like there is with any bureaucracy, right? I used to work at the CIA. I've worked at DOE laboratories. They are all very similar in terms of their absurd rules, regulations, et cetera. So you get a little bit of a hint of that in certain parts of the story. And again, hopefully that worked. I do want to say one thing, going back to what Sean said, mentioning UAPs and all the recent interest with the Nimitz sightings and everything. I dig UFOs and that whole subject. And I don't know if I'm ready to say on a podcast or whatever this is, I don't know what we call it. But I don't know if I'm ready to say, what my belief is when it comes to that topic. But it's very interesting that when you look at remote viewing, and my story didn't have anything remote viewing related in it, but you really start to see kind of the incestuous relationship with certain personalities that keep popping up all the time. I believe Hal Puthoff, who is now at To the Stars Academy, had a relationship with the agency and with SRI, if I'm not mistaken. And so his name in the kind of lore comes up over and over again. He's a pretty interesting guy. And one last thing I'll say is John Langan, if he is in the Hudson Valley, at some point we've got to ask him if he was around during any of the UFO waves where there were multiple sightings over, I think, an entire year. Very famous ones, including some landings. And I'm really curious to know if he saw any of that. But this is about weird World War III, so if there's time.
I could tell you, but I would have to kill you. I mean,
hey, fair enough.
I just, I'm sorry. It's not me.
To be fair, there's also a lot of false pauses in that stuff. So one of my friends was a stealth bomber pilot, and they used to do test runs before they kind of went overseas to do bombing runs over Iraq, and they would do it over Midwestern cities. They would do practice, and every time he did that, they reported him as I don't know if they were reporting him as a UFO sighting, but I imagine that just seeing the lights without seeing the actual black silhouette of the bomber would be. So there are other lots of false positives too, and you have to be cognizant of that.
And there was just because of the lore, right? In the Mid-Hudson Valley, there was actually a group of guys who flew light aircraft at night. And it was just a thing. It was just something and I actually did see them at one point when I was in the 8th grade, I think, at like a sort of a graduation party. And we were all just like, oh, but we never thought, it's odd. I never thought they were UFOs. Like, I just thought, oh, someone's flying a plane. I don't know why I thought that. You know, I don't think of myself as particularly perceptive in that way. But on the other hand, those may actually have been UFOs that I just confused with light aircraft. So who knows?
I just back on TC's story, just briefly, I liked sort of you talked about the multiverse, and it's sort of the reverse. I think we always think of like the conceit would normally be somebody who can jump to different realities. And this is that sort of, I think probably most people have probably heard of the Mandela effect, you know, which is this idea, you know, people swear they remember watching Nelson Mandela's funeral at a time before he had passed away, you know, in the 80s or whatever it is. Or, you know, remembering a movie that doesn't exist. And so there's a theory that you slipped out of another reality where that movie did. And so in your story, you've got basically everybody's doing that all the time, and doesn't realize it except for these characters. And I thought that was an interesting sort of flip on that idea.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I didn't actually even think of the Mandela effect, but that's exactly right. That's a great analogy to use. I'm going to steal that going forward, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Let's talk about maybe Erica's story, which is called Where You Lead, I Will Follow, an oral history of the Denver incident. And this is sort of, it's an oral history, so we get these different points of view, and I want to ask about that maybe as well, where that idea came from to do that. But just to set it up a little bit, it's talking about a game called Follow the Leader, which is sort of a Pokemon Go, I guess you would say, style, what's it called? Augmented reality kind of game that takes off like wildfire. And this story I loved, and I liked all the stories, but because it reminded me of an episode of Black Mirror in a lot of ways. Something that you would see on there, which I love that show. I know it's a little bleak for some people. But if you want to just kind of set up how the game works and within the story, and then talk about that aspect of the oral history and approaching it that way. Be interesting.
Sure. Well, it's obviously based on Pokemon Go, which I was playing a lot of at the time. I didn't get into it, and everybody else did. I was like about 2 years late, so I was it was kind of playing it a lot. So it's like, well, I kind of want to write a story about this, soon. And so in the story, so in Pokemon Go, you don't really interact with, say, like the environment so much, but in the in Follow the Leader, the game and the story, things that you do in real life, like say moving your shoes from like one place in the house to the other, or eating a certain thing or whatever, it's tracked. The app can track it. They can see what you're doing. They can, and then they give you instructions. So you get points for when you move a piece of paper from one pile to the other, or you get points when you like just do random things. And the idea is that these little tiny small change that people make includes people who work at a military installation. So through like millions or hundreds and millions of little tiny movements, they managed to, the United States manages to bomb itself through a series of very tiny movements. So I kind of had this idea of this game that has this kind of malevolence behind it. And of course, because it was a Cold War story, and it does take place in the modern era because there are cell phones, but it's still like it's actually based on the whole Russiagate thing. So people obviously blame the Russians, blame other countries, but there's no real country that would be so able to do this sort of thing that the implication is left that it's some sort of AI or some sort of malevolent force beyond what we can imagine. And
very Lovecraftian. The ending is very Lovecraftian, which is why
it's meant to be like this whole because you would have to almost be like a god to be able to know that moving a Post-it note from one computer to the other would cause the bomb to go off. And so I had the idea to write it as an oral history because I figured, because I tried writing it as just a straight story, and it wasn't working because I needed to kind of show all of the effects of the bomb, because the story takes place after the bomb has gone off, after everything is destroyed, war is imminent, chaos is erupting, and there was no way to really show that other than to show like the people from all over the world who created the game, who were who caused the bomb to go off, who were affected by the fallout. So there's I tried to come up with there's 10 different characters, and so they have pretty much 10 different views of how awful this would be, and also as the story goes on, showing you because like one of the characters, like the programmer who created the game, you realize that he never actually spoke to a human being, which tells you that it's not quite human beings doing it.
Yeah, I liked what you did with the oral history, and in addition to just getting these different points of view, was sort of like the different takes on. I mean, the event is obviously bad, but early on you have somebody say, maybe has a more positive view of this augmented reality game, and then as it kind of goes, maybe things get a little bit darker, and I like that sort of creeping dread sort of sense, and I like the idea because it felt very timely, of sort of algorithms getting out of control. And I think interestingly to me, with the Cold War, I remember my mom jokingly being like, the Olympics aren't fun because we can't essentially fight a proxy war with Russia now that the Soviet Union's fallen. I mean, we still kind of do, but you had this big bad, that everybody could point to, and over there
we have that today. It's just not. It's not.
But it's
really
more. Right. But it's more. But it's more diffuse, right? It's not a like.
It was.
Well, fair enough. But TC. I don't know. It's TC's favorite government. Let's just say. Okay.
With the Russians are just tremendously skilled at maskirovka, right? Deception and using very limited means to affect very large outcomes. But at the end of the day, their economy is their GDP is the size of Italy, so they play very well with a very small hand. Yeah. But they weren't behind the OPM breach, right? I have the government pays for my identity protection because the Chinese broke into it, and have anyway, it's there is a clear peer competitor today, and it's not the Russians.
That's fair. Yeah, can't argue with that. But I guess what I was getting at too is, I guess it's still monolithic, but I don't know. But never mind. We'll leave it.
However, Erica's point about the Russiagate and stuff like that, that was one of the reasons I pitched this, because I figured it would take about 2 to 3 years to get everything done and in publication mode, so that it would come out right before the election. That was by my design. The Halloween bit, that's just kind of gravy. It comes out in October, and that just kind of works. But I figured it would be a good time to revisit some of these topics it's in a non-political way. It's just, I think, a fascinating look at the way things could have been.
I guess what I was getting at is you do see things through these little algorithms and social media being shared in this game, and that's what I was trying to get at, and I think that the story felt very timely because of that. There's one other thing. I love the line when we talk about, since you've said how it happens, the airman who pushes the button that sends the nuclear war head off, bombs ourselves. Is she says, I was only following instructions, which of course famously, Nazi cop out. But here she's not following instructions from higher ups in the military. She's following instructions of a game. And I thought that was a brilliant little twist on that. I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the game is meant to, obviously you can't see it, but it's meant to be a very cute game, very, Japanese kawaii kind of thing. And so when she's following the instructions, like they're very malevolent instructions, you're pressing a destruct key. But, because of the way the game is designed, it's designed to be cute. It's designed to be like, oh, it's a friendly little game. She's not even thinking that she's pressing the button that could, sure, she thinks it's, disabled, but nobody in their right mind would think to press that. And I guess my point is that, social media and gaming and things can make you do awful things, and you have no idea what's going on because of the algorithms and because of just the complexity of it. And so yeah, it was definitely meant to be like, that's also why I started out this story with people being happy about the game, because again, you wouldn't think that something that looks so so innocent would be this horrible weapon of like a superior alien intelligence.
Yeah. And this is, we talked about aliens. This is where I'll put like my little tinfoil hat on, is like, I'm very skeptical. Here I've been posting a podcast, but a lot of the internet freaks me out, put it that way. We'll leave it at that. Let's talk about John's story, Second Front. So this is sort of a secret moon base sort of story. And I guess just give us, if you would, just give us the setup of kind of the position that the Soviets and the Americans are in when this kicks off.
Yeah, this is the mid 80s. There's the war, the Cold War went hot in late 1983, which was something actually that almost happened. I while writing another story, had done some research and had discovered that in late 83, there'd been the US and our NATO allies had launched this massive war game, Operation Able Archer, which was supposed to anticipate a Soviet attack, and conventional and nuclear. And the Soviets thought that this was a pretext for us to attack. And so once it's one of those things that you find about much later on, almost brought us to an actual exchange of some kind. So in the world of my story, that's happened. A limited nuclear exchange that's devastated large parts of the globe, and there is still conflicts being fought at local levels, but the planet's in pretty horrible shape. And fortunately, there's a secret moon base. Actually, there's two secret moon bases. There's one the Americans have, and there's one the Soviets have, Armstrong and Gagarin, and people are being shipped up there by both sides. Supplies are being brought up there. No one's 100% sure why they're up there. There were rumors that maybe this is the sort of as a stage to launch a colonization mission to Mars, but maybe not. And into this mix, where the Soviet base is about 3 times the size of the American base. But into this mix come these they're Lovecraftian monsters, the Mi-Go, although nobody ever knows that they're called that in the story. And at first they just call them the lobsters because that's what they look like. If a lobster that's like the size of a horse, and obviously it's some type of alien life form. It's coming into the moon from somewhere much further out in the solar system. For reasons that nobody is 100% sure of, although the point of view character thinks that it's no coincidence that they've shown up right as the US and the USSR have, as she puts it, basically committed mutual suicide. And so there's a question about what they're, are they hostile or are they not hostile? Are they dangerous but not intelligent? And the story kind of goes on from there.
Yeah, one thing, listening to you talk about it is something that struck me as I was reading it that I really liked, was that there's a lot of things that the characters don't know, and so we as readers don't know. And I thought you played with that really well, of like, why are they here? There's a rumor for this. Why is there a moon base? I just think that's an interesting technique as a writer to be able to play with that ambiguity. And of course it makes it in a way it makes it feel real, and it also makes it feel kind of more terrifying. You don't know what's tapping on the window or what have you. The other thing I really liked is sort of a couple ideas in here I can quote is It says, given the devastation the nukes have visited already, it was horrifying to think if anyone would deploy one now. On the other hand, it wasn't as if one more was going to make things substantially worse. That was an interesting idea. And then the big one to me was they're talking, because the lobsters are primarily early on attacking the Soviets, and the attitude seems to be like, well, good, we didn't align the Soviets anyways. And one of the characters says, this is I guess I'll censor my cursing. I don't really know who watches this podcast age range wise. We
don't worry, my mom is not watching, so
we
it's
don't
okay.
have that
You
granular
curse,
level of Nielsen rating, market research. But it says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Bullshit. You don't know what the enemy of your enemy is. I just wondered if you could talk about that, because it sort of reminds me a lot of things in history, that who you thought was your friend because they were the enemy of your enemy, it doesn't always turn out so well for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, opportunism leads us to make certain calls in the heat of the moment that when we were able to view them in retrospect, in the rearview mirror, we think, oh my God, how could you possibly have thought that something that was not even human was going to help you out? What politics makes strange bedfellows, I guess moon base fighting on the moon makes for strange bedfellows, I guess. So yeah, I kind of like that idea that you might think in the short term, hey, these things are some kind of weird space alien, we don't even know what they're doing, but at least they're attacking the Soviets. And not thinking, man, there's not that many of us left up here on the moon. Maybe we should try to reach out, which is never going to happen. I mean, I think thinking about the geopolitics of the time, I suspect the cosmonauts would have rejected that as a trap or something like that. But yeah, it doesn't, it ultimately doesn't end well in some ways for anybody.
Now, is this part of something larger, or have you worked in this world before? It's complete in and of itself, but it sort of maybe feel like maybe there was more that you've done, or are there any plans to? And I guess that actually could go to our other contributors as well, if this was part of a larger thing, or if you think you might dip back into this world at any point.
It was not. It was inspired in part by an anthology many years ago that I was not invited to, and no big deal. But one of my friends had put together an anthology of stories about power armor, Gundam suits or Iron Man or whatever. And I thought, oh, that's so cool. And I had this idea for a story about that sort of situation, or set in that sort of situation. And so when this came along, when the opportunity to write this story came along, I reached for that idea and kind of tweaked it a bit to fit into the context of the anthology.
Well, even the way that John described kind of just even the atmosphere of the piece was really creepy, right? Where they're looking on Earth and it's just swirling black clouds and but sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's extremely evocative, and I agree. Like it definitely stands on its own, and there definitely could be more. But
however, if a Hollywood producer would like to contact me about a possible series of films or TV shows, I'm completely willing to sell out.
Well, that kind of, I think, covers the story. It's always hard with short stories because you don't want to talk about them too much because then you give them away. I think we've hit enough to whet everyone's appetite, hopefully, with these stories. Sean, I wanted to talk back with you about maybe if you wanted to mention some of the other contributors or stories that you wanted to highlight. Oh, there's just so many great people in here, and folks can go to Bang.com or Amazon or wherever they want to go and look up the table of contents and click that buy button. But just if you wanted to talk about some of the other things in the anthology before we wrap up.
Yeah, I would start with David Drake's story, which was he's one of the reasons I was able to get him for the anthology is I said, look, I'm a veteran like you are from the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and here's the idea. And I think for him, it was the story was very personal because it really drew on his experience in Vietnam and Cambodia. But what it effectively looks at is, in a Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the Soviets were starting to summon inhuman entities, and then using them to infiltrate the U.S. military. And the whole story is about how that happened. They're trying to take out a shaman in deep in a hump. They're on a hump going through Cambodia, and during the course of that, something happens. So there's a little bit of that bit of coming home from war, being reunited with family. Can you trust that person when they come back? And I'll just leave that one there. Martin Shoemaker has a story that looks at, is more on the kind of Everett, many worlds theory. And it bases off the, you're all familiar with Schrodinger's cat, right? It's both alive and dead before the quantum function collapses. So, and this it ties into even remote viewing and things like that. But if you look at modern quantum mechanics and you're, and this is down at the subatomic level, like every quark has a spin. It can spin this, it can spin left, spin right, spin up, spin down, etc. But for every state, there's a possibility. There's a wave function. It's only until something happens that possibility is locked. But there are other universes, right, where it's spun left, and there's a whole set of possibilities that branch off of that. So in his story, there's a person who is looking at the math and the statistics, and the probability of nuclear war is so high that the fact that they haven't had one is a confounding element, right? It just doesn't fit the math. So there's someone out there kind of tweaking reality, and so it's kind of based on that sort of conceit. Another story, let's see, there's a great story by Brian Trent, which looks at, it's similar in this multiverse state, but there's only like a one parallel dimension, and the Soviets figure out how to get into that parallel dimension, and then they can wink in and out, to the corresponding place on Earth, in our dimension, and they use it to get a rapid conventional advantage to take most of Western Europe, minus a small sliver, valiantly defended by the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Fulda Gap. I just kind of asked them to throw that one in because my regiment defended the Fulda Gap, which is the main route of advance that the Soviets were expected to go through. But he essentially invents a new special forces that focuses on this interdimensional travel, and it's a really great examination of that. And the name, it's not, I think it's Orali, right? The alternative dimension is called Orali, which is the ancient Sumerian underworld, and it's different, right? It doesn't really have people there. It's got kind of copper in the air, like it's just a very different place. But I think it's the second story in the anthology, extremely imaginative, very interesting. And then there's a very Lovecraftian ending in the sense that it hints at something greater. Other stories, and I mentioned the one about Sarah Hoyt's story, which is a riff on remote viewing and fighting entities, controlled by the Russians and beyond. There's a story by Vila Meriläinen, who's a Finnish author, that kind of takes the idea of the Sholomants, which is it's like a school of witchcraft in Romania, that and then it kind of takes that into a Lovecraftian direction, where you go and there's a lot of good stuff that's in there. Marina Lostetter and Dr. Lostetter, her husband, do kind of, one of the naval stories. It's based on the USS Halibut, which was a, spy submarine. And, in the course of that, when they're trying to, what that spy submarine would do is they would tap, international communications cabling systems to listen in on Soviet communications. And it was a real submarine. It really existed, but they encounter something in the deep that they weren't expecting to encounter. So that's just a very broad preview of some of the stories that you'll see.
Well, thank you so much, as I said, for putting it together. It was a great anthology. Enjoyed talking about it. And before we go, I want to give everybody a chance to plug whatever they would like to plug. If you've got a book coming out or stories, or I'd rather you didn't try to sell us like Amway or Mary Kay or multi-level marketing, but I guess if you want to plug that, Tupperware, whatever.
Erica's got a game she wants to introduce you to. You might want to look at that.
I guess, Erica, you want to go first? You're on.
But I don't have a copy of the cover because I don't have any of my, author copies yet, but I have a novella coming out on November 3rd, Election Day, called Busted Synapses. And like I said, it's a rural cyberpunk, so it's kind of set in a world where the cities control everything, and they're very, and they've kind of pushed all of the human beings out into, the wastelands outside. And so it's a kind of a take on kind of like now, and people are addicted to this drug that can also cause them to travel between worlds. There's one of the main characters is a new person, kind of like an android, who are being manufactured in order to kind of replace human beings. The goal eventually is to replace humanity. This is only the first book in what I hope is going to be a series. It is standalone, like you can read it alone, but I hope to be the first part in a series. And so November 3rd from Broken Eye Books.
Okay, so
now.
Go vote and then go swing by the bookstore and pick up Erica's new book, new novella. TC, what about, I know we've got Tiger Bright coming out from Bain, but I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah, Tiger Bright is coming out in February of 2021, I believe, and it's available for pre-order. There's a spaceship on the cover, which I know is important when we're talking about science fiction, so it's proper science fiction. And this is a continuation, second book in the series that started, as you mentioned, with Tiger Burning. And it kind of takes the main character is the daughter of the main character in the first book. So it's almost like a generational series of books. And she has to travel into deep space to the homeworld of one of mankind's well, of course, it's their most dangerous adversary they've ever faced. It's the only one they've ever faced. And so she has to go on this mission to land on the homeworld and kind of bring back some of their technology. So February 2021, it's available for pre-order. I know it's on Amazon now. I don't know about Barnes and Noble. I'm assuming it's there too.
Could be, yeah. And as you said, it's a sequel to Tiger Burning. There we go. Sorry.
That's all right.
That is out now. I know it's out in paperback. I think it might be a mass market paperback. I'd have to look.
Yeah, you can get trade. That came out, I think, last year or the year before, and now mass market just came out a couple of months ago.
Yeah,
so
and of course ebooks, and you can buy them wherever you buy books or ebooks, or go to Bain.com, and we've got the ebooks there, DRM free. Plug. John, what about you? What have you got covered up?
Well, as Sean graciously pointed out, I have a new collection, Children of the Fang, which has monsters on the cover, as a good horror collection should. And also, I have a story out in this weird horror magazine from Undertow Press, which has just a fantastic Halloween-y kind of cover. My story is a short one, but there's tons of great stuff in it, and I'm just pleased because it looks so cool.
All right, Sean, what about you? You have anything on the docket, either as a writer or an editor? Because I know you wear both hats.
Yeah, so this is obviously, the whole podcast is based on the most immediate thing. There are a few projects that I'm working on. and I don't want to say too much about it, but there's another anthology that is coming out from Baen that looks at the future of AI and robotics from a military perspective. I think TC is also working on we both are working on stories to hopefully be in that from a military perspective and from a intelligence perspective on TC's side. There's a number of projects that I'm working on. One is the story I had in Visterion. It's not necessarily going to be necessarily the same world, but the same vibe. So I'm really starting to get into this corporate horror kind of. There's not a lot. Thomas Ligotti kind of has, for the most part, cornered the market. I'm sure John probably knows infinitely more about this than I do, but I think there's some room to really explore and work that. So I'm going to work on just starting a novel in that genre. I have a novel that I sent to my agent. He's taking a look at an earlier draft that is an occult detective novel called The Flatlands, which is based in Oakland and kind of Northern California. So we'll see how that goes. That's kind of, and I have a few short stories here and there coming out soon, but that's about it.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that, and to everyone else, what you said. We've got coming out here from everyone, and I just want to say thank you, everybody. This went really well. Really enjoyed hearing some of the behind the scenes, if you will, about these stories. So everybody, the book Weird World War III is out now, or by the time, it's not out now when I'm saying this, but it will be out by the time you're watching it. So run, don't walk, or just get online and buy it. Ebook and trade paperback. Sean, Erica, John, TC, thank you so much for being on the Baen Free Radio Hour today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for inviting us. Much appreciated.
And now another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years, they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's league are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart star kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now, the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now, Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake.
George Benton Tower, City of Old Chicago, Old Earth, Sol System. And you don't even want to know what this is going to look like when the exchange opens tomorrow morning. Omasupe Quartermain glared around the conference room at her fellows. Trifecta's not one of the big players, not like Technodyne or Zumwalt or even DeSoto Industries. But when the market finds out what that bastard did, we're going to see the mother of all runs, another mother of all runs. God knows we've seen enough of them since this crap started, she ended bitterly. Inokenti Kolokoltsov used his coffee mug to hide a grimace. The strong hot brew was especially welcome at 4 a.m. on a tempestuous night when he ought to have been in bed hours ago. The storms rolling in off Lake Michigan lashed George Benton Tower's flanks with 75-kilometer-per-hour winds and blinding sheets of rain. Thunder rumbled almost continuously, and lightning flickered across the tower's crown like an angry halo, striking its towering lightning rods again and again as it sought the absorbent earth. It was, he thought, all too appropriate a metaphor for what was happening to the entire Solarian League, and despite the hundreds of cubic meters of ceramicrete isolating this quiet conference room from the storm's fury, the tension about him crackled with its own angry electricity. Quartermain seldom waxed quite so strident, especially this early in the damned morning, or this late at night, depending upon how one wanted to look at it. On the other hand, she'd never been what one might call a fan of Manticore at the best of times, and the news from the Mobius system had hit a nerve. Not just with her either, he thought. eyes shifting to Agata Vodoslavsky. Omosupe's right about that, the permanent senior undersecretary of the Treasury said, as if his eyes had summoned her agreement. We're not going to get hit as hard by the market at Treasury as she is over at Commerce, but that's mostly because interest rates have already tanked. Her expression was at least as bitter as Quartermain's. It's a hell of a note when the upside is that the situation's already so shot to hell that even something like this can't make it worse. Except, unfortunately, that it can and will. Mobius wasn't that huge a chunk of our cash flow from the protectorates, not by itself. But if we don't get some kind of handle on this, we're going to look like an elephant gnawed to death by ants. Kolokoltsov winced internally at the simile, but he couldn't deny its aptness. What I want to know, Malachi Abruzzi said, turning icy eyes upon his normal ally, Nathan McCartney, is why we didn't hear about any of this before this friggin' Terekhov blew the piss out of UCell's gendarmes. Not to mention massacring the entire legitimate system government while he was at it. That is an apropos question, Kolokoltsov agreed, lowering his coffee mug and turning toward the permanent senior undersecretary of the Interior. He tapped the memo on the table smart top in front of him. According to this, you've been getting reports about Manti provocateurs in the fringe for months now, Nathan. Without any confirmation, McCartney pointed out in response. For God's sake, Innocenti, there are 17 trillion conspiracy theories running around in our so-called intelligence community. Half of them are from people trying to cover their own arses, and half the rest are from people so scared they see Mantis under their own beds, much less making trouble in the fringe. If I brought every one of them to you before we were able to confirm or disprove it, that's all the hell we'd be talking about. He glared back at the other mandarins, his body language defensive, but Kolokoltsov had to acknowledge his argument had at least some validity. Maybe not enough to excuse the way this had blindsided them, but some. I'm not sure that's a sufficient explanation, he said out loud, his tone cool. At the same time, none of us have covered ourselves with proactive glory since this all started. So instead of trying to fix blame for why we didn't see it coming, what do we know about it now? I think, his smile was frosty, we need to at least know how many arteries have been slashed before we start trying to control the bleeding. As far as what actually happened in Mobius is concerned, I think we've got the essentials, McCartney said after a moment. Everything we have so far comes from Captain Weaver's report, so I'm sure there's still a lot to fill in, but I don't expect what she's already told us to change very much. And we should trust your judgment about that after you never even mentioned the possibility something like this might happen? Kolokoltsov thought sardonically. I know I just said we've all made mistakes, Nathan, but really... And Captain Weaver said exactly what, Nathan? Vodoslavsky asked. Actually, I think Omosupe may have a better fix on that than my people do, yet, anyway. McCartney shrugged. I've got more background information, more possible background information, to help set it into context, but Weaver went to Commerce before she got around to us. Kolokoltsov didn't quite frown as he heard the slight but unmistakable edge in McCartney's voice, but he felt a vast weariness that owed very little to the lateness of the hour. The ship was foundering under them, and they were still trying to score points about who'd left which porthole open. In fairness, McCartney did have a point in this case, however. Captain Josephine Weaver commanded the Kolokainos Line's freighter Rudolfo Kolokainos. So far as any of them knew, Rudolfo Kolokainos was the only League merchant vessel to have escaped from Mobius, and Weaver had headed directly for Old Terra. According to her, Ivar's Terekhov, and oh, how all the mandarins had come to hate that name, hadn't even tried to prevent Rudolfo Kolokainos' departure, however, so it seemed likely other Solarian and neutral dispatch boats and freighters would soon be spreading the news elsewhere. It was unfortunate, but scarcely surprising, that Weaver had chosen to report what had happened to her employer before she got around to mentioning it to the federal government. It was equally unsurprising that someone at Kolokainos had promptly leaked the news to the public. Volkard Kolokainos' personal hatred for everything remotely connected to the Star Empire of Manticore had been legendary even before New Tuscany, and the incredible hit the shipping-based Kolokainos Empire had taken since the Mantis started seizing wormholes hadn't made him any happier. Not surprisingly, probably, since current estimates said Kalakaino shipping had lost over 80% of its value. So it wasn't surprising the news had leaked so rapidly, or that the gendarmerie casualty count Weaver had reported, which admittedly had been bad enough on its own, had been inflated by 200 or 300%. Few people had been awake to react here in old Chicago when the story broke, but 2/3 of the planet were up and about when the leak hit the public boards. The instant response had been furious anger, and that fury was certain to increase as the news sank fully home. At the moment, Malachi Abruzzi's people were playing catch-up, trying to get in front and shape the narrative to make sure that growing fury was directed somewhere besides at the people in this room, but they had their work cut out for them. More to McCartney's immediate point, however, Quartermain's position in the Department of Commerce meant she tended to hear things from the League's Transtellars before anyone else. In this case, the fact that she'd been an executive with Kalakaino Shipping for 20 years before becoming a bureaucrat only gave her even better connections. From her expression, she was less than pleased to have him underscore that point. "As you say, Nathan, we have a lot of pieces to fill in." Her tone was as chill as her expression. "What we actually know, or think we know at any rate, is that President Lombroso asked Commissioner Verrocchio for support after a violent insurrection broke out on Mobius. According to Weaver, it started in Landon, but spread quickly. In response to Lombroso's request, Verrocchio sent Brigadier Ussel and a couple of intervention battalions, along with enough light naval support to control Mobius's orbital space. Ussel landed her gendarmes to secure the capital and called in orbital strikes on half a dozen towns." Her lips twisted in distaste. "Weaver says that effectively broke the rebellion's back, although the hardcore rebels refused to concede defeat. So Ussel and her people assisted the Mobian planetary authorities in rounding up the diehards. She'd almost completed that part of the operation when Terekov turned up. He took out the Navy units. Weaver's not sure if they were destroyed or simply surrendered, although she thinks they most likely did, given the odds against them, and entered Mobius orbit himself. He contacted Ussel and demanded that she cease operations immediately and surrender her people. She refused, at which point he devastated a couple of square blocks of downtown Landon with a KEW strike on Ussel's HQ. Weaver says he killed the entire remaining planetary government in the same strike. Somebody named Breitbach wound up running the show planetside. Weaver says he was supposedly the rebellion's leader, and Ussel had him in custody but didn't realize who he was." Quartermain shrugged. "I don't know if that's true or if he's just a manty mouthpiece, but that's all we do know at this point." Kolokoltsov nodded. That hadn't added a lot to what he already knew, but it certainly defined the parameters of their problem. The political and diplomatic parameters, anyway. He was unhappily certain Quartermain and Vodoslavsky would be able to provide far more depressing detail about the economic parameters when they got around to that side of the problem. But apparently Quartermain had provided new information for at least one of the Mandarins. "None of the newsies have mentioned anything about Ussel's authorizing any kinetic strikes," Vodoslavsky said sharply. "Is Weaver certain about that?" "As certain as she is about any of it." Quartermain shrugged again. "We're dealing with a single report, Agata. With no way to cross-check, I can't guarantee any of it. If the gendarmes started using KEWs before Terekov ever turned up, that's not going to play well with the public," Vodoslavsky worried. "Which is probably the reason our good friends over at Kalakainos haven't mentioned it to anyone, yet," Kolokoltsov said. Quartermain gave him a moderately dirty look, but said nothing. "Can we keep it from coming out?" Abruzzi asked. "That's really more your bailiwick than anyone else's," Kolokoltsov observed, earning himself an annoyed look from the information undersecretary as well. "I don't know, Malachi," Quartermain said. "In the short term, probably. As Inacanti's just pointed out, whoever," she emphasized the pronoun, "leaked this didn't mention that aspect of it. So presumably they don't have any interest in leaking it later on. Unfortunately, the Mantis aren't that reticent." Terekov already posted his entire comm conversation with Usil on the Mobius Systems InfoNet. Weaver brought a copy of it with her. I viewed it. She shook her head, eyes bleak. If the woman in the street believes it's accurate, not doctored or edited, it's going to hurt us. Usil comes off like a friggin' lunatic, and they've got her threatening to execute prisoners in mass lots if Terekov doesn't back off. Kolokotov winced. That bit he hadn't heard yet. Doesn't mean a thing, Abruzzi said. The others looked at him, and he waved one hand in a dismissive gesture. It doesn't, he insisted. My people at Information could whip up that same conversation in 15 minutes from a standing start. Hell, we've done it. So the fact that the Manties are so obliging about sharing it actually offers us a way to attack it. We dig up Usil's records, demonstrate she's always been firm about completing any mission, but always scrupulously observed the relevant laws and regulations while she did it. He smiled. Trust me, whatever her records are really like, I can make her look like a Girl Scout. Then we point out how easy it would be to manufacture something like that. We don't usually want to draw attention to that, since it gives malcontents the opportunity to suggest we routinely do it. But in this case, we might want to go ahead and produce a clip of our own, showing Usil giving in the instant Terekov demands her surrender. Then we put that up on the boards, side by side with her threat to start shooting people, and admit her surrender was created out of whole cloth. Admitting that won't prevent it from having a certain subliminal impact, and it will conclusively demonstrate how easy it would have been for the Manties to do the opposite. That might help diffuse that threat, Kolokotov said skeptically. But what about the kinetic strikes? What happens when independent confirmation of those hits the boards? And it will hit them, he thought glumly. The Manties have been too damned good about hauling neutral newsies, even Solarian newsies, around with them. Be a bit hard to sweep their imagery of the craters under the rug, Malachi. We don't deny they happened, McCarthy said before Abruzzi could respond. You're not serious, Vodoslavsky protested, and Kolokotov understood exactly why. Every Solarian citizen knew the SLN prevented mass casualty strikes. That was why there was an Eridani edict in the first place. The fact that there'd been quite a few kinetic strikes by the SLN over the centuries was one of those unpleasant little truths which had somehow failed to make it into the same everyone knows territory as the Navy's reputation as the guardian of truth and justice in a darkling galaxy. Of course I'm serious, McCarthy said impatiently. Agatha, I understand the possible downsides, but we can't pretend there weren't any KEWs, and not even Malachi's people could convincingly explain why the Manties would be bombarding Mobian towns and cities outside the capital. That means they had to come from our ships, but— He raised his right hand, index finger extended. They weren't Usil's idea. They were called in at the urgent request of the legitimate system government and directed at centers of dug-in resistance, urban areas which had been evacuated of all civilians except those the rebels physically prevented from leaving to use as human shields, where the Mobian military and the gendarmes would have suffered enormous casualties if they'd gone in on the ground. He shrugged. I admit it was regrettable, and no doubt a lot of innocent civilians were killed, but that was as a consequence of the Lombroso government's decision, and, even more, of the rebels' decision to use those innocent civilians as cover. Brigadier Usil had been sent to assist the legitimate authorities, and it's well established that domestic police actions by legal governments don't rise to the level of an Eridani edict violation unless casualties are truly massive. In this case, they probably didn't exceed 250,000, 500,000 at the most. He shrugged again. As I say, regrettable, but not our responsibility or our decision. And I expect Malachi's people can do a pretty fair job of arguing that the Manties and their Mobian puppets are vastly inflating the fatalities anyway. Kolokotov puffed his cheeks, then took another sip of coffee. It didn't help. The bad taste remained as he contemplated McCartney's glib proposal. We can probably make that work, for a while at least, Abruzzi said after a moment. We've already been working on strategies headed in that direction, to counter Manti claims once Buccaneer hits its stride. Not the same, of course, because we're not talking about local government's assistance requests in Buccaneer's case, and it's aimed at infrastructure, not mass casualties. But I've got plenty of talking heads on record explaining that Buccaneer doesn't violate the edict for several reasons, including the argument that it's a legitimate exercise of the federal police power against treasonous Solarian citizens. It's easier to justify the destruction of infrastructure in hostile non-League star systems, but since we're denying the legality of secession, we should be covered even someplace like Hypatia. Like I say, none of that speaks directly to Nathan's suggestion, but it's all groundwork we've already put in place. Eventually, the Mantis version will gain traction in the opposition faxes, but they're still pretty marginalized. And frankly, the general public has the attention span of a gnat. He raised both hands, shoulder high and palms uppermost. By the time the other side's version gets disseminated, most Solarians will already have internalized our version. The other side's version, Kolokoltsov thought. Even here, he's not willing to call it the truth. Whoever said truth is the first casualty of war damned well knew what he was talking about. Which didn't mean Abruzzi didn't have a point. And as long as the Navy kept collateral casualties to a minimum, and the Mantis didn't force the task force commanders to resort to Parthian, whether or not we can mitigate that aspect, Mobius is still an economic and public relations nightmare, he pointed out. Economically, yes, Abruzzi replied, but in terms of public relations? He shook his head, and to Kolokoltsov's surprise, his eyes glittered with something that looked very much like genuine enthusiasm. Oh no, Innocenti, this time the fuckers have stepped right into it. They've given us the biggest club we've had since all this started. Excuse me? Quatermain sounded as surprised as Kolokoltsov felt, and Abruzzi actually chuckled. It was not a warm and mirthful sound. We've been telling everybody this is all about the Mantis' interstellar ambitions, right? He looked around the conference room, then snorted. Well, what else do you call a galaxy-wide operation to foment rebellion, violent rebellion, the kind that gets millions of people killed, throughout the fringe in order to generate pretexts for military intervention to set up pro-Manti puppet regimes? I'm sure someone on their side is going to claim this is a purely defensive reaction on their part, prompted by our senseless aggression, but there's no way in hell something like Mobius happened overnight. This had to have been planned in detail, especially given the reports Nathan's finally gotten around to sharing with us. He joined the others in momentarily glaring at McCartney, then shrugged. What we've got, what we can dust off and send to the boards at the most strategic moment, is evidence, pretty strong evidence, that we can make even stronger depending on how we go about presenting it, that the Mantis started organizing this years ago, that it's a long-term strategy, one they put in place before Raging Justice, before Spindle, before New Tuscany, before Monica, hell, before any open incident. He smiled coldly. Believe me, by the time my people are done massaging this, there won't be any more questions about the Mantis' real aims.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor. And that's it for the podcast, thanks to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Plus praise, thanks, and gratitude to Sean Patrick Hazlett, Erica L. Satifka, John Langan, and T.C. McCarthy, editor and authors of Weird World War III. And thanks to Tony Daniel for letting me sit in the captain's seat while he beamed down on an away mission. Until next time, I'm David Afsharirad, coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us next time, here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.